Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I am in the Poudre Canyon in northern Colorado, and I'm here on a hike with my dog Sherpa. And I thought I would talk to you today about how to get a better night's sleep in your hammock. For those who follow the channel know that I am a hammock backpacker, and I prefer sleeping in a hammock over a tent. And as my son so affectionately calls me, an old crusty, because I don't like sleeping on the ground. Sleeping on the ground hurts, even with a sleeping pad. For me, hurts my shoulder, hurts my hips. Therefore, I prefer sleeping in a hammock. But I don't want to give you the false impression that I get a perfect night's sleep in my hammock either. It's not like I lay down my head and I sleep for the next 8 or 10 hours and then wake up totally refreshed. Nah, I wake up sometimes in my hammock, but there are things that I can do that help me sleep better in a hammock. And I do always feel better sleeping in a hammock than I do over a tent. So today's video is going to focus on 5 tips that I use that help me get a better night's sleep in a hammock. As I'm looking for my hammock spot, let me give you tip number 1. Tip number 1 for a better night's sleep in your hammock is to elevate your feet. Now, I recommend elevating your feet throughout the day as well. You're hiking a lot of miles and all that blood is just pounding to your feet. And it's always good to elevate your feet and kind of relieve some of that pressure and help minimize the swelling in your feet. So whenever I take a break, like for lunch or a little snack, at times I like to elevate my feet and help relieve some of that pressure. Well, I do the same thing in my hammock. Now, some people, they will sleep with a backpack underneath their legs, which elevates their feet. I don't like to do that. That's uncomfortable for me. So what I like to do is I like to raise the foot end of my hammock about 3 to 6 inches above the head foot of my hammock, and that helps elevate my feet while I sleep. Let me show you how I do that. All right, so I've set up my hammock. And if you can notice a little bit, that's my foot end right there. That there is a slight elevation. So what I typically do on my head end, I'll put it about at eye level or height level, depending on the distance of my trees. And then for the other tree, I'll hang it 3 to 6 inches higher. And it also depends on your trees. Like that tree I'm hanging it on right now is at a little bit higher because I'm on a hill here. So I kind of eyeball it a little bit to see if I'm getting that little lean. And you can see, and that's kind of what I'm looking for, is a little bit of a lean in my hammock so that I can keep my feet elevated. Now, I don't want it too high because if my feet are too high up, then I'm going to slide back in that hammock. And that's happened to me before, that I have misjudged. And then I keep sliding back in my hammock all the way to my head end. And sometimes I'll slide out of my underquilt from where I'm at because I have it too steep. So this is one of those things you're going to have to play around with a little bit. But you do want a little bit of elevation for your feet to be elevated just a little bit. Again, that's to help kind of drain some of the blood from your feet that you've been hiking all day, and it helps minimize the swelling in your feet. Tip number 2, put a drip line on the end of your hammock. Now, this may seem like an odd tip for a better night's sleep, but I've seen where people who don't have drip lines and their hammocks, and they're sleeping in their hammock in a heavy downpour. And what happens is the part of your suspension that's not covered by your tarp, that rain will come down, and this is like a channel, right? And that rain will come and slowly drip down. It'll even go over a carabiner or even this little Dutch hook, right? And it'll come onto your continuous loop, and it'll slowly drip down into your hammock and get you soaking wet during the night. So what I recommend is putting some type of, here's some zinget rope that I have, And this is just a prusik knot that I put so I can slide it up and down. But what it will do is once that water starts sliding down, it's going to hit this knot and then it's going to slowly drip down. So they'll call it a drip line. So I put one on both ends of my hammock, and be sure that this drip line is underneath your tarp. Because if your drip line is out here and it's exposed to the rain, it's not going to do any good, because then the rain could gather on the other side and then slowly drip down. Like I said, I've seen a few YouTubers where this has happened to, that they didn't put a drip line on and heavy downpour, and they got wet. Their backs got wet, their quilts, their sleeping bags got wet that they were sleeping in. And to me, that will ruin your night of sleep. So tip number 2 for me is put a drip line on the end of your continuous loops on both ends of your hammock. Make sure the tarp is covering it so that you provide a water break for when the water is coming down, so the water will drip down onto the ground and not into your hammock. Tip number 3 involves something I do just before I get into my hammock. So what I like to use are these biodegradable wet wipes. And I typically take 2. I take 2 for each day, and these are wonderful. So the one thing I don't like doing, I don't like getting into my hammock being all dirty. And typically one of the first things I do when I get to camp is I wash off in a stream or a creek if I have the chance or opportunity. But even walking around camp before I go to bed, I notice my calves and my feet will still get dirty, especially if I brought camp shoes. So one thing I will always do before I get into my hammock and go to sleep is I will wipe down with it. I will clean off my feet and clean off my legs real good, because there's nothing worse than sleeping in your quilt and your hammock and you feel like this grains of dirt and just kind of maybe pine needles and stuff rubbing against you when you sleep. And I think it's just it's a mindset for me of just being cleaner. So I'll wipe down my face, my hands, my feet, my legs, and I feel cleaner when I get into my hammock. So it's helping protect my quilts, help preventing it from keeping it from getting dirty, as well as protecting my hammock and keeping the dirt as much as I can out of it. And it just gives me that mindset of being clean. I'm going to put on a clean set of clothes. I'm going to have my body's going to be wiped down, just kind of that top layer of dirt. And that helps me get into the mindset of sleeping because I feel much more refreshed from head to toe. And that'll help me sleep better in my hammock. My 4th tip is probably my most practical tip for when I sleep in a hammock at night. So typically on my backpacking trips, I will bring a clothes bag. And this is a Z-Packs roll top clothes bag. It's made of Dyneema, super lightweight, and it helps keep my clothes dry inside, which I like. But when I'm in my hammock and I sleep at night, I like having a little support under my leg. But the thing I like about this one, let me show you what I do. So this is what I do when I get into to camp. I bring an extra set of clothes. I have a puffy jacket, a Ghost Whisper, that's awesome. You know me, I love my hoodies. I bring an extra hoodie, shirt, and I'll even bring some down booties, keep my feet warm at night if they get cold. And I bring an extra pair of shorts, and I will bring a extra pair of socks. So I bring camp clothes that I like to sleep in. And what I'll do is this bag, if you turn it inside out, it has this nice, soft, material, which feels great when I sleep on it. And that's why I'll use it. And so what I'll typically do is once I change into my camp clothes I'll put in the shirt that I hiked in that day. I'll put that in there. I'll put in socks that I hiked in that day, my shorts, and I will put my puffy jacket in there as well. I'll keep my booties out. I got a little thing that I put them up here by my head in case my feet get cold, and I can easily access them in the night. And that'll be part of my next tip. So then what I'll do is, I'll roll it up again. And now I've got this great little bag that has a soft material. So again, once I switch it out, and I don't wear my shoes into my hammock, but it's winter in Colorado, so I'm not taking them off. But what I'll do is, I'm typically a right to left sleeper, and I like putting them underneath my knees. It gives me a little more support when I sleep at night, and that really helps me sleep the best when I can have a little extra support underneath me. And a bonus tip is that because I put my hiking clothes in this bag and I'm sleeping on it and it's underneath my quilt, my hiking clothes are going to be warm the next morning. I mean, what's worse? One of the worst things to do is to put on cold, frozen socks and a shirt or whatever, and that is if you bring camp clothes like I do. Horrible putting on cold clothes when it's probably already 30, 40 degrees outside, the type of backpacking that I do. So this little trick here not only helps me sleep better at night because it gives me support underneath my legs, but it also keeps my hiking clothes warm. So when I change into them the next day, I'm putting on warm socks and a warm shirt to get ready for the day. And that's awesome. That's really awesome. Tip number 5, don't go to bed cold. And that may sound duh, but for me, I like my feet to be warm, my hands to be warm, and the top of my head to be warm. If those things are cold when you go to sleep, you're only going to get colder, because as you're sleeping, your body is lying still. You're not moving around as much. So your body temperature is going to drop a little bit, and you're more than likely only going to get colder. So for me, the tip is don't go to bed cold. My feet need to be warm. My hands need to be warm. I've seen people do push-ups, jump jacks, run in place. If you're lucky to have a fire at night, then that can keep you warm before you get in. I'll rub my feet back and forth. I'll rub my hands as well, but I don't want to go to bed cold. And for me, what I typically sleep in is kind of a dry fit hoodie, very lightweight, and shorts, and that's it. Even if it's 34 degrees outside, that's what I go to sleep in. And I want to be warm in that, because if I do start getting colder overnight, that's when I'll start pulling out. I'll pull out. I have my little organizer here. I'll pull out my little beanie to keep my head warm. I'll pull out my gloves to keep my hands warm. And then my clothes bag, like I showed, I have my puffy in there. I can pull that out for an extra layer. And the last resort that I use, and this is why I love this little bag, easy access, is my rain jacket. I like a rain jacket that doesn't breathe, because I want it to capture my heat. I use this as my outer layer for heat insulation. And there are times at night when I've had to layer up with all of my clothes and my puffy, my rain jacket, everything to stay warm during the night. But if I go to bed with all of my layers on, just to try to stay warm, I'm probably going to be really cold that night. So I do whatever I can to get myself warm. Another trick that I do is I won't change into my camp clothes until I get ready for bed. And as you know, trying to change clothes in your hammock, it's hard. It's not easy. But what it does is all the moving around and trying to take off my shorts and my shirt and moving up and down. Guess what? That gets my blood flowing. It's warming me up. And generally, I'm kind of hot when I go to bed after I do that. And I'm a warm sleeper. So that's what works for me, is trying to put on my camp clothes in my hammock. It gets me moving, keeps my feet warm, and then if my feet are still cold, I'll use the down booties to try to warm them up, or I'll just rub them and try to keep them warm. Because to me, that is kind of the trick: is don't go to bed warm in your hammock. You want to have kind of your minimal amount of clothes on and be able to fall asleep like that, and then have your backup layers ready to go, whether it's in your organizer, or I have a little, shelf behind me for my booties, or I keep maybe my puffy or my rain jacket in here, other things I can easily access, so I can easily put them on in the night, and I can layer up as if I tend to get colder during the night. So that's tip number 5. Don't go to bed cold. Those are some tips that I use that help keep me warm at night. Again, I like to keep my feet elevated, so to minimize the swelling in my feet, and they'll feel better the next morning. 2, I like using the drip line in case of a heavy rain. I don't want to get soaking wet during the night. 3rd, I like to clean off. I like the fresh set of clothes. I like to clean off with those large wet wipes that I use. And I like to be clean when I go to bed in my hammock. 4, I like using my clothes bag for support underneath my legs. Even though I always try to achieve that flattest lay I can, sometimes you don't, depending on your environment. And so that clothes bag gives me a little extra support underneath, and I love it. Plus, again, that bonus tip of, it keeps my hiking clothes warm. So when I'm changing into my hiking clothes the next day, they're already warm. And then finally, 5, don't go to bed cold. Have layers ready at hand in your hammock that you can pull out. Again, for me, my feet, my hands, my head, those are things that I tend to get cold first, and that's what I like to make sure that they're warm. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Those are just a few of the tips that I use to help me sleep in my hammock better at night. Would love to hear from you folks about tips that you have that help you sleep in your hammock better at night. I do think hammock camping is the way to go for the best night's sleep. Obviously, it's up to the person and what works best for them. But I know for me, my bad nights in my hammock are far better than my good nights in my tent. With my tent, I just always wake up with an ache and pain, like in either my hip or my shoulder. And that's when I sleep well. With my hammock, I don't wake up with any aches or pains. I never wake up with aches or pains in my shoulders or my hips. I never wake up with pain in my feet. Sometimes there's a little more stress on the back of my legs, and I do feel a little achiness sometimes there, but never like I do when I sleep in a tent. So for me, hammock camping is the way to go. And again, these are some of the tips that I use. I hope you found them helpful, and they can help you find a better night's sleep on the trail. Thanks for watching. Good girl. Can we get in the truck? Yeah. Sit. Good girl. Gotta wait. Gotta wait. No, sit. Good girl. All right, go on. All right. Let's head back home.